I would ask you to welcome on stage now the advocate for Mr. Carvill, Francis Carvill, entrepreneur and philanthropist. Michael, come join us as the advocate. Thank you. Are you all set, sir?
Yes, Rowan, give me a second.
You settle. You take your breath. I'm just standing here with my finger over the button that says go.
I'm getting excuses in first. I hope these slides work. They were playing up a while ago.
I want to tell you, it's more about the passion of this man than any slides.
If the slides don't keep going, I'll keep going.
You will. You tell me when we're going to start.
Start.
We're gone.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, students and seniors, and everybody who got in here tonight, I have a very difficult task because I am championing the very worst class of a person. Thanks to Charles Dickens, all Victorian people are about cruel and gruel and workhouses. But the Industrial Revolution is supposed to consist of people who exploited whole families. I'm doing the Paul, watching over my shoulders, make sure the slides are working, excuse me. And they were kept in near slavery in cold and damp factories so that the entrepreneurs could live in beautiful mansions and eat steaks while the people starved. But Francis Carvill was no such person. He did live in a nice house. He lived out at Benvenue. It's out there on the Kilbrony Road in Rostrevor. But he contradicts the Dickensian stereotype in every single way. And the second obstacle I have is he says he's representing Francis Carvill. Who the heck is Francis Carvill? Because nobody ever heard of him. How come there's no streets named after him? Just watching this. I'll stop doing that distracting thing. There's no streets named after him. How come there's no statues to him in the town if he's that important? Did he really do anything for Newry? Now, there are only a couple of historic relics that exist of Carvill in Newry. And the first one is a substantial headstone-type monument that's in St Mary's Graveyard on Chapel Street. If you get a chance, just walk down the path and visit it. Now, the second relic that we have of Carvill is up in Bagnall's Castle. And it's a little poster, an advertising poster. It's looking for people to go on a journey, a not very nice journey during the famine. People were being offered passage on the Lady Caroline that was leaving the port of Warren Point, going to St John, New Brunswick in Canada, around about June 1847, the era of coffin ships, another Dickensian stereotype that we all believe in, that everybody was being killed in coffin ships. I'm happy and proud on behalf of Newry to state that it has been documented that no passenger ever died on a Carvill ship. And it wasn't they just had one or two. All his adverts in the papers at the time promised good provisions and water, and in some of them it detailed the many pounds of meat and all you would have. The Carvills did not sail coffin ships. The booking office was here in the middle of the town, around at 9 Sugar Island, which is nowadays Gordon's Chemist Shop. That's only 100 yards away from here. But there's no sign of Carvill there. So, since a fortnight ago, we have a new marker of Francis Carvill's existence in the centre of Newry, when the Ulster History Society put up a blue plaque on the front of the Canal Court Hotel. And it was very significant that that was unveiled by John Fisher, whose family carried on the shipping traditions of Carvill. People don't know that Fishers came after Carvill. The Fisher family have always revered the name of Carvill in all their family lore. John Fisher can tell you many stories of Carvills. But as I said, he was not the typical person of the Industrial Revolution, because here is what the Newry Examiner said about him when he was only 44 years of age. It said, his persevering enterprise, I just wanted to go too far ahead of the writing, his persevering enterprise has contributed in an eminent degree to the commercial greatness of the prosperous town to which he does honour, and his generous liberality of hand and heart conduces to the comfort of the many who are engaged in the various branches of the great establishment over which he worthily presides. You have never heard that about anybody before or since, or in any other town. I could dwell on these words, just repeat them all night, and then we could vote, and I would win. Another commentator, writing in a book called The Picturesque Guide to Carlingford Bay in 1846, the man's 46 by this stage, it said, Francis Carvill of Newry, ever in the van of improvements in that neighbourhood. And then it went on to praise not only him, but the staff that he employed, because they were offering the facilities of their offices and working away on the infrastructure of this town and the region. 90 years later, in the history column of the Newry Reporter, it's still going all those years, it's stated that Carvill became the most extensive trader and extensive employer in Newry. That means that all of you sitting down in here who have roots in Newry, it's very likely that your grandparents or great-grandparents worked for Carvills. And they benefited, I'm getting the plug in again, his generous liberality of heart and hand. His importance to the economics of Newry is very clear, because the Reporter article goes on to say, besides his sawmills, his spade factory, he also carried on shipbuilding, and he owned several vessels. So this man's getting wider and bigger. But you know, they were only playing it down. I don't know why they had forgotten about it. I'll bring you back to the start, to the first documentary evidence that I was able to find of Francis Carvill. Was in the Directory of Newry for 1826. He was only 26 years of age at the time, and he had a simple ironmongery business in Water Street, another 100 yards away from us here. He was one of 7 hardware shops in Water Street and North Street at the time. There's no trace of it remains, of course. Sorry, my slides, I was worried about this, so I'll just talk on. Right? At the age of 30, he announced in the local press that he had acquired the extensive Newry Iron Works, which was manufacturing spades and shovels. And by 1840, that factory was sited on Merchant's Quay at the Canal Court. That's why the Ulster History Circle chose that place for the blue plaque. He hasn't moved very far, 100 yards around us in a circle here. And at a later date, those spade works were moved down to what we now know as the Buttercrane Shopping Centre. And I believe that the spade making was the source of his first wealth, what's called a cash cow, that allowed him to go into his other developments. And the reason that he was so successful, there were 65 other spade mills in Ireland at the time, but it's clear that he was an innovator, an inventor of a sort, because within a year of taking over the ironworks, there was newspaper adverts for Carvill's new improved spade. And by the end of the 1840s, in Newry, at the Canal Court site, he was making 800 spades and 1,000 shovels a week. And then you'd find with little clippings that his spade was being used as far away as Fermoy in County Cork. And by 1850, there was a war in spades, believe it or not. A war of spades. And a crowd in Dublin started to promote the idea that they had got a new improved spade. And what's in the newspapers is that Carvill was publishing a picture of his spade that he had made 20 years earlier, that they were calling the new improved spade. I think what happened was that he built up his cash in the spade making early in the 1830s because he began shipping people out and running the shipping line by 1835. I know that because he turns up in the Canadian records claiming taxes and so on back on passengers that he was shipping out there. And then in the mid-1840s, he began building ships in Newry. This is totally significant. Building ships on the middle bank, I believe it was opposite where the Quays Shopping Centre. And he actually owned about a third of that site where the quays are. So you see all these bits of ground you put in your mind here, all these things that he owned in around Newry. And he was an influential and powerful man in his 30s because when the Newry Navigation, which became a private company to run the canal that Paul's friends built, when he became a shareholder in it and a director in it, and I don't think it's any coincidence that the Victoria Lock and the Albert Basin were all completed during his time of ownership. He also petitioned for the bar at the mouth of Carnford Lock to be deepened, so that bigger ships could get in. So he pops up in adverts, like in the middle of the famine, he was importing Indian corn. Or if anybody has ever studied the famine has heard the people talking about the yellow meal. So I can tell you that you're here because he brought yellow meal to your grandfathers and fathers and mothers that helped the people in this area sustain themselves through the famine. There was a million other things on that boat, but I didn't want to read it out in case somebody thought I was singing the Irish Rover. But on the same day he was selling timber, the same day as he was selling all this meal, etc., he had loads of timber coming in. He set up a depot out in Nova Scotia to buy timber out there. And his next set of premises that he had for timber was what we now call TK Maxx, that whole site. And a man that's not very far from the front of the audience here was telling me yesterday that used to be Shields' timber yard. So there was no Shields' timber yard, it was Carvill's timber yard. And then they went in with Haldy and Shields. Then Haldy and Shields became Haldy and Fisher. So Francis Carvill's all around us. He had also discovered that by 1850 he was making plaster moulding and other materials such as that out at Kilbrony in the what's called Forestbrook out there. And he had a vision that from Newry, and I haven't a notion where my slides are at now, but I'm sorry, I have to run on with my time. He had a vision that the ports of Greenore and Warren Point, feeding through Newry, would join into the railways, and the railways would take us right through to Sligo, and then join the Dublin Railway and the Cavan Railway, so that Newry would be the port for the middle of Ireland. I wonder if he had lived beyond the age of 54 in 1854, would Belfast ever have got off the ground? Because he was building ships here. And Belfast didn't get going until the 1850s. Now, I have very short time to tell you the other things about him. Is that he was a man with a generous liberality of heart and hand. And his name is found on the list of the donors to the Unitarian Church over in William Street. He raised funds for Daniel O'Connell's repeal movement. He was the chairman for the relief of Mrs. Mitchell after John Mitchell was exiled. And he was on the committee that brought the Mercy nuns here. He was a visionary that created transport links that kept us on the map. And he likely employed your great-grandfather and helped your ancestors survive the famine by eating the Indian meal. And I reckon he should get top score on all three categories.
Michael, thank you. Well done.